The letter arrived on a Tuesday, not certified, not urgent. Just an envelope resting on the mat, as if it had every right to be there. Inside, everything was polite, clear language, neutral tone, perfect formatting. They weren't accusing me of anything, they were informing me. If this story is touching you, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. At the bottom of the page, in clean legal font, was the sentence that would undo my life. All actions taken are fully compliant with the law. I read it 3 times, because I didn't understand how something lawful could feel like a threat. That house wasn't just a structure, it wasn't an asset. It wasn't an address. It was where my life slowed down enough to make sense. The place where nothing remarkable happened, and that was the miracle. I didn't inherit it, I worked for it. Years of careful decisions, jobs I stayed in longer than I wanted, moves I didn't make because stability mattered. I believed that ownership meant security, that a deed was a promise. The problems didn't begin with debt. That's the part people assume. I wasn't reckless. I didn't gamble. I didn't ignore payments. What happened was quieter, more procedural. It started after my partner died. Suddenly, unexpectedly. One day, the house was full of small sounds. Footsteps, coffee mugs, conversation. The next, it echoed. Grief has a way of making paperwork feel distant. I didn't rush to reorganize finances. I assumed time was allowed. I assumed wrong. The mortgage had clauses I'd never read carefully. Not because I was careless, because nothing had ever gone wrong before. Joint responsibility, succession conditions, review triggers, words that don't matter until they do. When I notified the institution, I expected empathy. Instead, I received instructions, requests, deadlines, everything phrased as assistance. I complied. Every document. Every signature. I answered emails within hours. I believed cooperation mattered. Then came the reassessment. They said it was standard, triggered by a change in circumstances. They weren't threatening foreclosure. Not yet. They were reviewing eligibility. Eligibility is a strange word. You don't feel eligible or ineligible in your own home. You just live there. The assessment wasn't personal. It wasn't emotional. It was numerical. Income recalculations, risk profiles, future projections. Grief doesn't factor into equations. I explained my situation, my plans, my intention to stabilize things. They listened politely, then sent another letter. The letter explained that the terms had changed, not illegally, not arbitrarily. According to clauses I had already agreed to, I contacted a lawyer. He was calm, almost apologetic. They're within their rights, he said. That phrase would become familiar. The first notice wasn't an eviction. It was a warning, a requirement. Meet new conditions. Provide additional guarantees, things I couldn't produce quickly. I tried to negotiate, asked for time, asked for consideration. They offered options. Options that looked reasonable on paper, refinancing, restructuring. Each option came with costs I couldn't absorb. The house began to feel temporary, even before anything was decided. That uncertainty seeped into everything: sleep, concentration, the way I walked through rooms, already preparing to say goodbye. Friends told me it would work out. Surely they can't just take your home. They didn't understand. Nothing was being taken. I was being processed. The next letter arrived, more formal, more final. They informed me that proceedings would begin, not because I had failed, but because I no longer qualified. That's the cruelty of compliance. You can do everything right and still fall outside the acceptable margin. Court wasn't dramatic. No confrontation. No raised voices. Just representatives presenting facts, documents, numbers. I was allowed to speak. Briefly, I talked about history, about commitment, about years of consistency. They talked about policy, risk, exposure. The judge listened carefully, asked questions, nodded, then ruled. The ruling wasn't harsh. It was neutral. Permission was granted. They could proceed. I felt something collapse in my chest. Not anger, not shock, recognition. They followed the law, every step, every requirement. And now, legally, the house was no longer mine to keep. The notice period felt surreal. I packed slowly, deliberately. Each object asked a question. What matters enough to carry? What becomes memory? Neighbors watched quietly. Some asked if I was okay. I said yes. Because explaining legality feels pointless. On the final day, I stood in the doorway longer than necessary. Not because I expected a miracle, because I needed to understand how something so ordinary could end so completely. The door closed. That sound was louder than the gavel had been. Afterward, people asked what went wrong. I told them the truth. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, no villain. Just a system designed to protect interests, just not mine. The house was sold quickly, efficiently, market value, no complications. The system worked. I rented a small place across town. Temporary, they say. I stopped correcting them. At night, I still picture the old rooms. Not with nostalgia, with disbelief that something so solid could disappear through paperwork. The hardest part wasn't losing shelter. It was losing permanence, the sense that life had an anchor. I don't hate the institution. They did exactly what they were allowed to do. That's the part no one wants to hear. Because if legality equals morality, then my loss was justified. And that's terrifying. Sometimes I reread the first letter, the one that started it all. The sentence is still there. All actions taken are fully compliant with the law. I believe them. That's what hurts. They followed the law. Then they took my home. If you think stories like this should be told, you can support the channel by liking this video. If you want to keep watching, subscribe to the channel. A new episode every day. Cool doesn't always mean fair.